My name is Emily Carter. I'm 32 years old. I've worked as an illustrator for children's books most of my adult life. Quiet, observant, a little introverted, but independent. At least I used to be. 3 weeks ago, everything changed when I lost my sight. It was a rainy afternoon in early March. I was driving back from a client meeting when a distracted driver ran a red light. I remember the sound of shattering glass, the impact, and then nothing. When I woke up in the hospital, everything was dark. Not blurred, not dim, just darkness. They said it was temporary. Trauma-induced cortical blindness. My brain had simply shut down the ability to process visual signals due to the shock. The doctors were hopeful that my vision would return within weeks. I clung to that hope like it was a lifeline. My parents insisted I move back into my childhood home so they could take care of me while I recovered. I didn't argue. The truth is I was scared. Not just of being blind, but of being helpless. I had always prided myself on living alone, managing my finances, my work, my life. Suddenly, I couldn't find the bathroom without bumping into the hallway walls. I couldn't tell day from night. I couldn't see my own face. The first few days were filled with awkward kindness. My mother doted on me, spoon-feeding me soup, fluffing my pillows, and narrating every movement she made as though I were a small child. My father hovered in the background, mostly quiet, occasionally offering to read my emails aloud or manage my bank transfers. At first, I was grateful, and exhausted. But slowly, something began to feel off. It started around day 10. I had grown used to the patterns of sounds in the house, my mother's quick footsteps on the tile, the creak of the front door when Dad brought in the mail. That evening, as I made my way from the guest room to the kitchen, using the wall as my guide, I heard my mother's voice on the phone in the next room. Her tone was low-clipped, not her usual sing-song when talking to friends. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, I was barely functioning, but something in the air changed when she realized I was nearby. Her voice stopped mid-sentence, a pause, then a too sweet, too loud call. "Emily, sweetheart, are you all right? Do you need help walking?" Her tone was overly bright rehearsed. I told her I was just getting water and heard the quiet rustle of papers being hidden. The phone call ended. I brushed it off. Maybe it was nothing. But that night lying in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had walked in on something I wasn't supposed to. A few days later, my vision began to return, not all at once, but in waves. First, I could detect light, then shadows, then outlines. I didn't tell them. Not yet. Something in my gut told me to wait. The first time I saw my mother again, I was sitting on the couch while she folded laundry. I didn't let on that I could make out the way she tucked a small envelope into the side of the laundry basket. When she thought I couldn't see, the next day I watched through a foggy lens, yes, but I watched her open my mail. Not the junk stuff. My bank statement. That night, I told myself maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe this was just overprotection. But then I remembered something else, something from a week earlier. I'd asked my mother if she could read me my latest royalty email from my publisher. She said it hadn't come in yet. I had asked 3 days in a row. Still no email, she claimed. But now as my eyes adjusted to light and forms and faces, I noticed that same email open on her tablet when she left it on the kitchen counter. The subject line said, "Your quarterly royalty payment summary." She had lied. My stomach twisted. I hadn't even told them I could see shadows, let alone read. What else had they hidden from me in the last 3 weeks? Then came the real turning point. It was a Saturday morning quiet in the house. My father had gone out to run errands, and my mother was upstairs. I made my way to the study, slowly feeling along the walls, keeping up the act. I wanted water from the mini fridge in the corner, or so I told myself. But what I found instead, tucked under a pile of magazines, was a printed document with my name on it. At first, I thought it was something routine. A letter from my publisher, maybe. But as I scanned the heading, my breath caught. Property transfer agreement. It listed my house, the one I bought 5 years ago in Seattle, with my name marked as grantor, and a second party listed as my mother. There was a signature that looked like mine at the bottom. I had never signed this. That's when I knew something was deeply wrong. I folded the paper carefully and returned it to its spot. I didn't take it. I didn't confront anyone. I just stood in the center of that room, the light from the window casting long lines across the carpet. and realized the truth. I had become more than just blind. I had become vulnerable, and someone was taking advantage of that. So I made a decision. I would continue pretending. I wouldn't tell them that my sight had returned. Not yet. Because the first things I saw when my vision came back weren't sunlight or smiles. They were secrets, and I needed to see more. The next few days, I played my part to perfection. I moved slowly, hesitantly, bumping into corners I could clearly see. I reached for cups with unsure hands. I asked for help finding my toothbrush, even though I had already placed it precisely. My parents seemed pleased, perhaps even relieved that I was still dependent. But I had never felt more alert in my life. The haze in my vision was almost gone now. I could see their faces, the way they glanced at each other when they thought I wasn't listening. I could see the way my father would tap the side of his phone, glance at me, and leave the room to take a call. I noticed my mother starting to close her laptop more quickly when I came near. Every little detail was adding up. Late one afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table pretending to trace the grain of the wood with my fingers while my parents talked in the next room. They didn't say anything too obvious, nothing like, take her money or she's never going to know. But I caught enough. She hasn't asked about her account, my father said. She won't. She's not thinking about those things right now, my mother replied. Their voices dropped, but I heard the tone dismissive, certain like I was no longer capable of making decisions. That night after they'd gone to bed, I slipped out of my room and quietly made my way to the living room. I had memorized every creaky board in that hallway over the last 2 weeks. I knew where to step, how much weight to place, when to hold my breath. My mother's bag sat on the side table, half unzipped. I opened it gently and found her tablet. It was locked, of course, but her password was something she had once told me years ago when she forgot at my birth date backwards. It still worked. There was an email open from a real estate agent. Subject listing photos and staging timeline. I scrolled. The agent had attached interior shots of my home in Seattle, photos I had never seen taken without my consent. The message read, "Once the property transfer clears, we can go live by early April. Excited to help you sell, my house wasn't just being transferred, it was being staged, photographed, prepared to sell, without me." I put the tablet back exactly as I found it and returned to my room, my hands shaking. Over the next 2 days, I noticed more. My father's briefcase was never in the house when he left. He had taken to carrying documents everywhere, even on grocery trips. Once, I saw a yellow folder peeking out marked Durable Power of Attorney. I had never granted them that. No one had even asked. More than once, I caught my mother walking out of my room when I was supposed to be asleep. She had the same expression, each time composed, but hurried, like someone who thought she was on borrowed time. They didn't know I could see them now. They didn't know I was starting to uncover everything. Then came the moment that confirmed everything. I was in the hallway, pretending to feel for the wall with my hands, when I saw my father coming up the stairs with a stack of mail. He didn't see me right away. I watched as he looked at an envelope, one from my publisher. He glanced around, then tore it open. He didn't call me, didn't bring it to me. He tucked the check inside his shirt pocket and kept walking. I blinked hard, not because I was shocked, but because part of me had been hoping I was wrong. That maybe my parents were just overbearing, that maybe all of this was just fear, stress, confusion. But that moment ended the doubt. My own father was opening my mail, taking money sent directly to me. I went back to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the floor until my eyes burned. This wasn't care. This wasn't concern. This was theft. This was betrayal. And they were doing it so carefully, so politely, so quietly, because they thought I was blind. I started hiding my sketchbook. I kept a small notebook under my mattress where I logged everything I saw each day, the times they entered my room, the phone calls, the paperwork, the facial expressions. I didn't want to forget a thing. I began preparing for what would come next. I didn't know exactly how far they'd go, but I was beginning to see the shape of it, and I knew I needed proof. They thought they were managing a fragile daughter, but I was building a case. By the end of the 3rd week, my sight had almost completely returned. I could walk confidently, read fine print, even sketch outlines in my notebook by moonlight. But I still pretended. Every day I stayed in the role of helpless, grateful Emily, the daughter who needed help pouring water, who squinted at nothingness, who smiled weakly at her parents as they ushered her from room to room. And behind that act, I watched. My opportunity came on a Thursday morning. My parents left early for what they said was a medical consultation regarding long-term support options. That phrase stuck with me. They hadn't said it to my face, but I overheard it as they spoke in the hallway, assuming I was asleep. My mother's voice was too calm, too rehearsed. I waited 10 minutes after they drove off. Then I went into their home office. This wasn't snooping. This was survival. I opened the bottom drawer of my father's filing cabinet. He had always been meticulous. He labeled everything, dated every folder. I scanned through documents until I found one labeled with my name. Inside were several pages, property documents, bank statements, medical forms, and then I saw it. A printed copy of a limited power of attorney form already signed, already notarized. Only, it wasn't my signature. I knew my handwriting. I had spent years sketching every form of lettering in my artwork from fantasy calligraphy to minimalist cursive. The signature on that form wasn't mine. It was close, but not quite. Too smooth, too perfect. And it had been dated 2 weeks prior, right around the time I had been in the hospital. My breath caught. My hands trembled. My father had declared himself my legal representative using a forged signature. I turned the page. There it was again, my signature on a transfer of ownership form for my house in Seattle. A digital copy of the deed was attached. It showed my mother as the new primary owner. It listed the transfer as a family asset realignment for healthcare purposes. Healthcare purposes. They were planning to take everything. I returned the documents carefully, leaving no evidence I had seen them. But I took photos, clear ones with timestamps. I sent copies to my private email and also backed them up on an encrypted drive I kept hidden in my sketch case. That night, my mother stood in the kitchen humming softly as she stirred soup. I sat at the counter pretending to fumble for a spoon. She smiled at me. Warm, bright, so familiar. "Emily," she said, "how are you feeling today?" "Tired," I answered. "Oh, sweetheart, I know this has been hard." She reached across and gently touched my hand. It almost fooled me. Almost. But I had seen the email from her to a real estate agent that morning. Subject ready to proceed with April listing. Body transfer complete. Just need to finalize financials. I had also seen the draft contract to lease out my apartment in Seattle scheduled to go live in less than 2 weeks. They weren't just selling it, they were going to profit from it. Rent it, flip it, maybe keep it for a few years, and then sell once the market peaked. And all of it was being done under the assumption that I would never know, that I would never see, that I was blind to it all. Later that night, I heard them whispering down the hall. I couldn't make out every word, but one sentence came through clearly, like it had been dropped into the silence just for me. "She's more passive than I thought. We'll move forward after the doctor's assessment." The doctor's assessment. What assessment? My mind began to race. Were they planning to have me declared mentally unfit? Were they coordinating with someone to take full control not just of my finances, but of my medical decisions? I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in the dark and went through my notes. I had photos of documents, screenshots of emails, records of logins, dates, times, patterns. I wasn't imagining any of this. They were constructing a legal trap around me, one that would make it look like they were protecting me. But in reality, they were positioning themselves to own everything I had worked for. And no one would question it. After all, what could a blind woman do? What could she prove? They didn't know I had already seen enough to prove everything. They didn't know I was one step ahead. And I was just getting started. I began preparing my response not out of anger, though that was there, but out of necessity. My future was being written without me. If I stayed quiet, I'd be erased. Every move had to be precise. I started with my old contact Dana Perez, an attorney I had worked with during my first book deal. She wasn't just a legal mind, she was someone I trusted. Years ago, she had reviewed my contracts, taught me how to protect my rights, and insisted I create clear ownership documentation for my assets, including my Seattle property. At the time, I'd rolled my eyes at her paranoia. Now I understood. I called Dana from a prepaid burner phone I bought online, shipped to a P.O. box. I told her I needed advice privately. I told her I had reason to believe that someone was trying to take legal control of my assets through fraudulent documents. I didn't explain everything yet. Not over the phone. She didn't hesitate. "I can be in town Friday," she said. "Let's meet at your place. Just us. I'll bring everything we need." That gave me 4 days. 4 days to keep pretending. 4 days to gather more. I turned my old sketching case into a lockbox. I lined it with a false bottom, where I hid USB drives printouts and a copy of the falsified documents I had photographed. I labeled everything by category: property, medical, financial. I created an index. It was obsessive, but I needed clarity, not chaos. Every morning I went through my routine like a sleepwalker. Every night I listened. I moved a recording device into the hallway vent, where voices traveled most clearly from the kitchen. I didn't need confessions. I needed patterns, timelines, tone, proof that this wasn't a one-time misunderstanding but a coordinated effort. I reviewed the audio every evening. Once she signs, we can list everything in both our names. That doctor friend of yours, he's still on board for the evaluation. She won't fight it. She hasn't even asked questions. It's like she's giving up. They weren't criminals in the traditional sense. They were careful, deliberate, and soft-spoken. There were no threats, no shouting. They smiled during dinner. They complimented my hair when I brushed it, slowly fumbling like I couldn't see the mirror. But everything they did was calculated. I started testing their reactions. One morning, I asked my mother, "Do you know where my bank app is on my phone? I wanted to check if my royalties came in." She froze for just a second, just long enough for someone watching her face. Then she smiled. "Oh, sweetheart, you shouldn't worry about that right now. Your father's been taking care of all that. You just focus on resting." I nodded, said thank you, and walked back to my room. But inside, I was burning. That night, I checked the bank account from my tablet, one they didn't know I could still use through voice control and magnification tools. Over $8,000 had been transferred out in 2 weeks. The memo read Home Staging Consulting Early Deposit. They were using my money to prep the sale of my home before the transfer had even cleared. They were that confident. The next day, I placed a hidden camera on the bookshelf in the living room disguised inside a vintage book cover. It gave me a clear view of the table, the printer, and most importantly, the expressions on their faces as they handled paperwork. That same afternoon, my mother printed a draft labeled Voluntary Medical Consent and Evaluation Request. She stapled a photo of me to the front, an old one from before the accident. I watched through the footage later as she scribbled notes at the bottom and marked a date, Friday 10:00 a.m., the same day Dana would arrive. It was too perfect. They thought I'd sign this without question, that I'd blindly trust them just as they'd taught me to all my life. But the version of me they were dealing with now was no longer blind. I had seen the outlines of greed behind their affection. I had watched the people who raised me treat me like a stepping stone. I wasn't broken. I wasn't confused. I was documenting everything. Friday would come, and with it the truth. Friday morning came quiet and heavy. The sky was overcast, the air still. In the silence of my bedroom, I sat fully dressed holding my sketchbook. I hadn't drawn in weeks. The pages were mostly blank except for notes, timelines, diagrams, evidence. But this morning I sketched, just a single line at first, a window, then hands pressed against the glass, then a woman staring back from behind it. I titled the sketch When They Thought I Couldn't See. Downstairs, I heard my parents preparing. They moved quietly, efficiently. I recognized the clink of coffee mugs, the thump of folders on the kitchen counter, the low hum of tension disguised as normalcy. At 9:45, my mother called out, "Emily, sweetheart, we have a visitor coming soon. A family friend, Dr. Kim. Just a quick chat to check how you're adjusting." I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence build. Then I called back, "Okay, should I come down?" "No, no," she said quickly. "We'll come up." I smiled, but they couldn't see it. At 9:58, I positioned myself on the bed, seated, calm, eyes unfocused. I held the sketchbook closed in my lap, voice recorder tucked in my pocket camera still running from the bookshelf across the room. I had set it to live stream to Dana, who was parked in her car 3 blocks away. At exactly 10 I heard footsteps on the stairs. 3 sets. My mother knocked overly gently. Emily, can we come in? Yes, I said softly. They entered. My mother, my father, and a man in a blazer with a clipboard. Dr. Kim. He smiled at me like I was 5 years old. Hi, Emily, he said slowly, carefully. I'm just going to ask you a few questions. All right? I nodded. He sat in the armchair across from me. My parents hovered near the door, quiet. Do you know where you are right now? My parents' house, I answered. And what year is it? 2025. He smiled again, made a note. That's right. And do you know why I'm here? I hesitated. My parents said you're here to help. He glanced toward them. They nodded. Can you tell me how you've been feeling emotionally since the accident? I looked down. Tired. Disconnected. Like people think I'm not here. He made another note. And your vision any improvement? I shrugged slightly. Still dark. My mother stepped forward. She's been very passive. She's not asking about her finances, her home, anything. She even let me manage her bank transfers. I tilted my head slightly. Did I let you, or did you do it without asking? The room shifted. My mother's smile froze. Dr. Kim blinked. I'm sorry, she said, laughing nervously. Sweetheart, we've been helping you. Have you? I asked, eyes locked on hers. My father spoke up. Emily, we're just trying to do what's best, I know, I said calmly. That's why I recorded your phone call with Dr. Tran, the one where you asked for a mental evaluation to establish incompetence. My mother paled. Dr. Kim sat upright. Emily. I wasn't aware. And I know about the house, I said, turning to him. The forged signature, the staged photos, the transfer request marked as medical necessity. My father stepped forward. You're confused. No, I said, my voice steady. You're confused. You thought I was still blind. I stood up. And you've been treating me like I don't exist unless I'm manageable. Dr. Kim stood too. I think I need to step out for a moment. That would be wise, I said. He left eyes wide, murmuring something about ethical liability. My mother moved toward me, her voice trembling. Emily, we didn't mean for this to get out of control. We just wanted to help. You wanted my house. We were afraid for your future. No, I said quietly. You were afraid I'd recover and start asking questions. I walked to the bookshelf and lifted the camera. The red light blinked. The live stream was still going. My parents stared. Who are you sending that to? My father asked. My attorney, I replied. She's been watching this whole conversation. You don't have to do this, my mother whispered. Yes, I said I do, because they had made one fatal mistake. They underestimated what a daughter can see when she stops trusting the people who raised her. The door had barely closed behind Dr. Kim before the room turned cold. My parents stood frozen in place, as if unsure whether to deny, explain, or beg. Their faces betrayed everything. Not guilt exactly, but panic. Panic that the performance was over. I didn't move. I let the silence settle, let them stew in it. For once I had the advantage, not because I was cruel, but because they had taken so much from me, quietly thinking silence was consent. My mother finally broke the stillness. Emily, she said softly, carefully, we didn't mean to hurt you. I raised the small notebook from my nightstand. This is a list of everything I've seen and heard in the last 2 weeks. Everything you assumed I couldn't notice. The forged signatures, the staged listing photos, the money you moved from my account. My father stepped forward, voice tense. You were incapacitated. We had to make decisions. You never asked, I said. You never sat down and said, Emily, are you okay with us stepping in? You decided. You acted. You lied. You were vulnerable, he said, and you still are. I'm not, I replied. And even if I were, you don't steal from people you claim to love. Vulnerability doesn't mean forfeiting control. My mother moved closer, her eyes wide and wet. Sweetheart, we were just trying to make sure everything would be safe. The house, the finances, your future. My future, I laughed under my breath. You staged my house without my knowledge. You called a doctor to declare me mentally incompetent. You opened my mail, redirected my royalties, and forged a signature on a deed. That's not safety. That's theft. Her voice rose, cracking. We're your parents. Yes, I said. And that's why it hurts more. I crossed the room to the drawer where I kept my sketchbook, the one with evidence tucked in its false compartment. I held it tightly in my hands, not to show them, not yet, but to remind myself that I wasn't imagining it. I had proof. I had clarity. I invited Dana here for a reason, I said. She'll be arriving in less than 20 minutes. My father's jaw tightened. You went behind our backs. You went behind mine, I said sharply. I just caught up. My mother sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly tired. She looked smaller somehow, folded in on herself. I don't know what we were thinking, she murmured. You were thinking you'd get away with it. I walked to the window and looked outside. The street was quiet, the sky still gray. I could almost see Dana's car at the end of the block, though it was just out of view. I'm not kicking you out, I said after a long pause. Not today, not like this. But things are going to change. My father looked up sharply. What do you mean? I mean you'll no longer have access to my finances. I'm locking all accounts. I'm notifying the bank, the publishing house, my legal contacts. You'll remove your name from any property paperwork by the end of the week, or I'll take legal action. You'd go that far? He asked, eyes narrowing. I'm already there, I said. I turned toward them this time, with no fear in my chest. You don't get to make me feel like I'm overreacting. You don't get to twist this into something noble. My mother whispered, We were scared. So was I said. But I didn't use your fear to justify betrayal. A knock sounded at the door downstairs. 3 firm raps. Dana. I didn't say anything more. I walked past my parents down the stairs and opened the door to my attorney. She stepped in, her bag slung over her shoulder, her eyes taking in everything at once. Ready? She asked quietly. I nodded. More than ready. She looked up the stairs where my parents now stood. My mother looked like she wanted to speak. My father didn't. Let's sit at the dining table, Dana said. I have a few documents we need to sign together. As I led her into the room, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control, not revenge, not satisfaction. Just stillness, confidence. I wasn't lost. I wasn't blind. And I wasn't anyone's victim anymore. Dana laid out the papers on the dining table with calm, practiced movements. Each document was neatly tabbed, color-coded, and already annotated. Her presence was grounding, professional, firm, and entirely unshaken by the tension in the room. My parents stood in the doorway, not speaking. My mother's hands were clenched at her sides. My father's expression was unreadable, somewhere between frustration and disbelief. Dana looked up at me. We'll start with the revocation of power of attorney, then the financial freeze orders. After that, we'll get to the property correction documents. I nodded. Let's do the financial part first. As I signed the first form, my mother stepped forward. Emily, are you sure this is necessary? She asked, her voice brittle. We're your family. I didn't look up. Yes, and that's why I'm stopping you now before this gets worse. We didn't do anything illegal, my father said. Dana glanced at him, her tone cool. Forgery, unauthorized access to financial accounts, and real estate fraud aren't just family misunderstandings. Mr. Carter, my mother looked like she might cry again. You're punishing us for helping you. No, I said, finally looking at her. I'm protecting myself from people who help themselves to my life. Dana handed me the next form. This one authorizes your bank to remove all linked secondary users. They'll issue new cards and logins. It'll be effective by the end of the day. I signed. With each stroke of the pen, I felt something release. I hadn't realized how much pressure had built up in my chest. Weeks of pretending, of silence, of uncertainty now lifted with every signature. When we reached the property transfer reversal, Dana turned to them. I've already contacted the county clerk. Your attempted deed transfer will be flagged. If you don't voluntarily withdraw by Monday, we'll file a formal dispute and request a fraud investigation. My father's face turned red. You're going to shame your parents like this. After everything we've done. I stood, pushing my chair back slowly. You want to talk about shame, I said quietly. Let's talk about pretending to care while staging my house to sell. Let's talk about opening my mail, moving my money, forging my name. That's shame. This is our home too, my mother said. We've lived here for years. No, I interrupted. This is my home. You moved in, you took over. You treated me like a burden while smiling to my face. And now you're leaving. My father took a step forward. You can't just kick us out. I can. And I am. I handed them a letter. It had been drafted with Dana's help, a formal 30-day notice to vacate with a clear outline of dates, expectations, and conditions. You have a month, I said. I'm not being cruel. I'm giving you time. You're abandoning us, my mother whispered. I looked her in the eyes, searching for even a flicker of real remorse. No, I said. You abandoned me the moment you saw me as an obstacle instead of a daughter. Neither of them responded. Dana collected the papers, packed them into her bag, and stood. I'll follow up with your real estate agent, she said to me, and I've already flagged the notary who approved the forged signature. My father muttered something under his breath, but I didn't ask him to repeat it. I walked Dana to the door. Before she left, she paused and looked at me with a small, approving smile. You handled this with strength and grace, she said. I'm not sure I felt graceful. You didn't need to. You just needed to stop them. And you did. She left and I closed the door behind her. The silence in the house was immediate tense. I stood with my back to them for a moment, breathing. Then I turned. I'm going for a walk, I said. When I get back, I expect this conversation to be over. I expect you to start packing. You'll regret this, my father said flatly. No, I said, grabbing my coat. I regret that I had to do this at all. I opened the front door and stepped out into the afternoon air. It smelled like wet pavement and blooming trees. Spring was coming. Behind me, the door closed softly. I didn't look back. I walked until the houses gave way to quiet streets lined with tall trees. My feet carried me through the neighborhood where I grew up, past mailboxes I once decorated with sidewalk chalk, past the small park where I learned to ride a bike. Everything looked the same, but I wasn't. In the weeks since my accident, I'd lived in darkness, but losing my sight hadn't been the hardest part. It was discovering how invisible I'd become to the people who were supposed to love me most. When I returned home, the lights were off. My parents had retreated into their room. There were no questions, no confrontations, just silence. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed in the living room surrounded by sketchbooks and blank canvases. I hadn't touched my art since before the accident. Somehow, it felt too vulnerable, too raw. But now something inside me had shifted. I picked up a charcoal pencil and began to draw not from imagination, but from memory. First, the staircase I had climbed every day pretending not to see. Then the curve of my mother's shoulder as she whispered into the phone. My father's hand sorting through my mail. The outline of the forged signature. The shape of my own name betrayed. I filled page after page with shadows and light, with the angles of betrayal and the contours of awakening. By morning, the living room floor was scattered with images. No color, just black-white, and everything in between. I titled the collection, What I Saw When I Could Finally See. A month passed. My parents left the house quietly without confrontation. They took only what belonged to them, at least on paper. I didn't speak to them much in those final days. We'd said everything already, both in words and in silence. After they left, I stood alone in the house. It felt bigger somehow, empty, but not hollow, like the air had cleared. I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I just sat on the floor and exhaled. In the weeks that followed, I reopened my art studio in Seattle. I reconnected with old clients, reached out to new ones. I told them I was back, not just professionally, but truly back. My first new exhibition was a solo show called What I Saw. It was raw, personal, unflinching. The gallery owner hesitated. At first, she wasn't sure people wanted something so heavy, but they did. People came, not just to admire the technique, but to stand inside the emotion. I watched as strangers stood in front of the piece I'd titled The Signature, their eyes misty. I watched women in their 50s and 60s lean in close to the empty chair, where a daughter sat in a room with her parents standing behind her, their faces turned away. After the show, a woman approached me, gray hair, soft eyes. She took my hand and said, I wish I'd had your courage when I was your age. Thank you for telling the story. I smiled. It's not just my story, is it? She shook her head. It never is. That night, I went home and opened a letter I had written weeks ago but never sent. A letter to my mother. It read, I was blind for 3 weeks, but I've been blind for longer than that. I didn't see what you were willing to do to feel in control. I didn't see how easily love turned into leverage. I don't hate you, but I won't trust you again. I'm building a life without the need to be rescued. Because now I know I was never broken, just blinded by the comfort of believing you had my best interest at heart. I see things clearly now, and I choose myself. I never mailed it. Maybe I never will. But it sits in my desk drawer, my reminder of how far I've come. People often ask me now, did your parents ever apologize? The truth is they didn't, and maybe they never will. But that's not what I needed. What I needed was to stop waiting for someone else to hand me back my life, and instead to reclaim it one step, one sketch, one truth at a time. Because when my vision returned, the first thing I saw wasn't the sun or the trees or the faces I loved. It was the truth, and that changed everything. Changed